Welcome everyone to part number 2 of this week's tournament run with cheeses. In the last video I got knocked down to the loser bracket in round number 2, but this is actually where the fun begins. Because the entire loser bracket is going to be best of ones, which means that everyone, and I mean everyone, even the best players, are going to be extremely vulnerable to my cheeses. Let's begin. The first game on the loser bracket is going to be against Coconut Games. Now for the loser bracket I decided to play random for the first game, and after this I'll be playing Terran every single game. It was actually a pretty funny matchup because Coconut Games is a streamer who also only cheeses, so I was pretty sure that this was going to be an absolute banger. But remember that I was setting myself up to do sophisticated cheeses only, so this is probably going to be a sophisticated cheese against a bit of a brutal cheese. Now here we were joking that we got our best race, so I predicted it was ZVZ, and I can spoil you guys that I was actually right, which is pretty funny. I think her main race is actually Protoss, and mine is obviously Terran, though at this point I don't really have a main race myself. Now her getting Zerg would be the worst thing to happen to my strategy, because what I wanted to do was go for a hatch block. But you cannot really hatch block a Zerg. Well, I mean, you can, but it's just not very good because they can just make Zerglings early and it just doesn't really do a whole lot. And Zerg also doesn't really mind having to take the base somewhere else. Now, notice how she was trying to distract me by sending the drone to the third base, but then she did send one to the natural anyway, and then there's a hatchery over there. Now, I didn't really know what to do from this opening in a ZVZ. Especially because she didn't have a hatchery down already. I actually do like the idea of properly trying this against a high-level Zerg just to see if I could maybe, you know, absolutely blow their brains out and make them malfunction and see if I could win that way. It would be pretty funny. This pretty much is a builder that I usually like to do against Terran, by the way, where I go for the double extractor trick, getting myself up to 16 supply instead of the usual 14 without making an overlord, and then you go hatchery spawning pool. And since Terrans usually take a proxy hatchery pretty seriously because it could be either roaches or a spinecrawler rush, they might even skip going for a command center, go for like a one-base factory kind of thing, and then I already have the hatchery at home. So this is actually a pretty good build. I really like doing this against Terran in particular. But I don't think I've ever done this against a Zerg, so yeah, this is a little scary. I decided to cancel that hatchery and make an evolution chamber there just in time for me to be able to afford my queens back at home. Now that is already a lot of Zerglings, and the biggest problem here is, guys, it's not that I don't have units, because I can still make units whenever I want. Is that I don't have gas. So if this is going to be Banelings in particular, I'm gonna need some proper gold tier micro to get out of it. If it's just a Link Flood, I think we're actually gonna be okay. But if it's gonna be Banelings, then we're definitely gonna be in a bit of trouble. Now, one thing that's nice is that my evolution chamber on her natural is actually a pretty good scout. Like, I know it sounds really dumb to say that everyone can see that link speed finished. 45 seconds faster than normal, by the way, so that's how you know that this is going to be a pretty vicious attack. Now, what I needed to do here is just put my queen in a really good position on the ram. Notice how most of the links are fighting my queen, and my links have the concave against her links, which means that my Zerglings are trading way more efficiently than they would out in the open. And now at this point, like, keep in mind, all I really have to do is survive. I still have one queen left. My spinecrawler is slowly going to come online, and I do have a decent amount of Zerglings still. Now, queens are actually a pretty valuable resource in this scenario because you need to be able to inject. If she has 2 queens, she'll get a lot more links out than I. But judging by how many links are actually joining in as reinforcements, I think she might not even have a queen. I mean, I don't want to be BM. Maybe she just forgot to inject her hatchery or something. But it's very possible that this is just a 1 or 0 queen all in. And sadly for her, I do actually have a pretty decent economy. You know, I do have to say, me not making gas is actually helping me out here because I had more than enough money to build everything that I wanted. Like, look how many minerals I have right now. If I was mining gas, I would have been able to get link speed, but maybe not the extra queen, maybe not the extra spine. GG is called, and that is the first game of the loser bracket done. Game 2 is going to be against Ateshi, a Korean Protoss player who is about 5.4k MMR. Definitely a pretty strong opponent.
Not enough.
Now, I know his name because I always see him play in the StarCraft EVO tournaments, but I don't think I've played him before in an actual StarCraft 2 tournament, so I have no idea how he plays. So what I decided to do for this game was just use my knowledge of how Korean players usually play, which is that they're like a little more cheesy, a little more aggressive than the Europeans. I noticed that certain builds, this was actually pretty funny back in my pro career, I would kind of have a different list of builds against Korean than against European players. Like against European players, being aggressive was often quite good, while playing against Koreans, it was often quite good to play a little more macro. Now, obviously, playing macro here is not going to happen, right? So what I decided to do was go for a fake proxy first of all, and then just kind of see what I was going to do from there. Like, I don't really know exactly how he plays. I want to mold my cheese around what he does, right? So whether I go for battle cruisers again, or whether I go for like a freaking 5 racks all in after this, I don't know yet. I guess we're gonna have to find out. Now, for the most part against Protoss, this build is, I think it's pretty alright to do anyway. I don't think it's very common anymore. I mean, after all, I am a retired pro, so maybe you shouldn't be taking advice from me, but from real current pros instead. But I think playing like this against Protoss is pretty good in general, just to throw them off. I always found that playing against Protoss, the game seems very easy for them if you just play standard and don't play too aggressive. So I like taking every opportunity I have just to do something a little weird. Fake proxying or hiding my barracks in my main base. Like, notice how on the bottom right side of my main base, there's actually a lot of space where you could hide a barracks. Now here he was trying to take a natural, but I'm actually not buying it because that was way too late. The natural should have been done. Now there is a Zealot out here, which could mean that he wanted to go for Zealot into Adept, and that's why he delayed his natural. But I'm not actually buying it. There's also no second pylon in the main base to be seen, so there is definitely something proxied. And my first two guesses were there was either going to be a proxy gate or a proxy stargate. Now, whether it's either one of those, I can't confirm it yet. There's a lot of builds you can do. I also noticed at some point there was a build where people would go for like a quote-unquote fake proxy Twilight Council, so you would play as if you were getting all in, but then they were just getting Blink with a slightly delayed base. Now, I did make 2 Reapers. What I'm going to do with my Reapers is just try to scout around the entire map, really. First of all, I should scout around my main base for like a Stargate or a Proxy Gate. Proxy Gate would have hit by now, by the way. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be a Stargate at this point. Once again, not 100% sure. So for that reason, I should scout around my main base just to see if I can find the Stargate. If I can't find anything, then I'll literally scout the entire map, which sounds like a big deal, but it's actually kind of doable with 2 Reapers because they're pretty fast. So now we're playing what kind of looks like a Wings of Liberty game, to be honest. Like, I'm on 1 base with a bunker and a 1-1-1, and my opponent's also on 1 base doing whatever he's doing. Like, I have absolutely no idea. I also haven't found anything yet, which is crazy. There has to be something out on the map. The only other... Oh, wait, I just got a really cool idea for another video. Let me share this with you guys. The only other option is that he just didn't spend his money. And now I'm thinking I could do a video where I do that kind of build where I make my opponent think I'm hyper cheesing, but I'm just not spending my money, and then I just make 3 command centers at once or something like this. It'd actually be pretty funny. But there we go. It was indeed not a proxy Stargate or a proxy gateway. It was a proxy Dark Shrine Robo. And I do have the answer to this because I have 2 Cyclones and a Medevac. Now, I only have 1 scan, which is going to make this a little rougher. There's actually a downside of being on 1 base. I do only have 1 orbital, so I don't have that many scans for the Dark Templars. And that's why I'm also making an engineering bay over here. I was really trying hard to find his Warp Prism with this Medevac, but I wasn't able to find it. Now I'm going to start my Raven as well as a turret. Turret is going to be at the front. And there we see his Warp Prism. The reason why he's suiciding it is obviously because he already has DTs inside. Judging by the shimmer, exactly, it does look like 3 DTs. I'm going to be able to kill 1 of those, I think. That Prism should probably die. I guess I didn't... Maybe I could have dropped a Cyclone on it or something. That would have been pretty nice. Now, I wasn't sure if he picked up his DTs and then I saw them over here. Now I'm going to be able to lock onto the Prism, and the Prism does die. Now, you might think I killed the Prism with DTs inside. That was actually not the case. I could see the little shimmer under the Prism there, which means that he did manage to unload both DTs. And now we are in a pretty good position. But since my build was ridiculously focused on 1 base, our economy is not really going to be far ahead at all. At least assuming that he built a Nexus at some point. Now, what I decided to do here is a move that I really liked, is that I'm gonna go and kill the proxy. Normally, you can't do this because of the threat. And if Protoss players have a Twilight Council, they can actually make blink and charge, so you don't usually want to be out on the map. But since we managed to shut down the Warp Prism, even though he has the 2 DPs, I have the Raven as well. I thought it'd be a really good moment to just go and depower both the Gateway and the Robo over here. Now, my plan was to follow this up by playing a crazy Mecha Lin, which is very uncommon against Protoss, of course, but I thought it would be pretty cool. Now, sadly for me, he rebuilt that Prism, and that was actually very scary to see, because Prisms sound stupid. It's actually a counter to Cyclones, because you can just pick up the unit when it gets locked onto, and you don't even really do any damage. As you can see, this is a pretty annoying, hopeless fight, because I don't even think I really dealt any damage to the Stalkers, and all my Cyclones are orange HP. It's actually pretty cool the kind of micro you can do with a Warp Prism, by the way. If you look like a good Protoss player, it's absolutely devastating. Now, I'm adding a command center over here, but I'm actually not planning on playing macro at all. The reason why I'm adding the command center is just because mech mostly takes gas, and as you can see, I have too many minerals anyway. I wasn't able to saturate this natural earlier on, get those 3rd and 4th gases, so I have a lot of money. And I guess I can always use... It's actually pretty cool to do that. I used to have a build against Protoss where I would go for 3 command centers. And then I would just use the mules from the 3cc to have a little bit extra income as I was doing an SCV pool. And I'm going to go for the exact same plan over here, just to go for like a big Cyclone attack. Now, you might have noticed I left my reactor alone. It's because I was planning to build a factory there. And making naked Marines without upgrades is not necessarily that good. But then I scanned his base and I realized that he was playing fake macro himself. He had the Nexus, which he definitely wanted me to scout, but I didn't scout it earlier. But he didn't have probes there. So even though he built the Nexus, he hasn't been making extra probes. He probably repowered the Twilight Council, made charge, and he's just waiting for me to attack. So I think my strategy is actually going to beat that pretty handedly. I'm going to wait for him to attack me. And if he doesn't attack, if I notice that he actually was, you know, he transition from that, let's say he picks a 3rd Nexus or he starts building probes, then I'm gonna do the SCV pool myself. So we're kind of in a little bit of a all-in standoff here. Like, is he gonna all-in me or am I gonna end up all-inning him? It all depends on what I'm gonna see over here. I could send this medevac to scout. I could also send a Cyclone on the map to scout, but it's a little scary to do against Blink Stalkers. I can also send an SCV, of course, or I could just go for a scan. Doesn't really matter. In the end, I'm going to send my Marines. The reason why I send my Marines is because those Marines don't have upgrades and they're just not going to be super meaningful in the fights. You can basically tell that all the basic units in StarCraft are pretty garbage without their upgrades. Like Zealots and Zerglings without their speed and charge upgrades, pretty freaking terrible, right? You can use them for some purposes, like proxy 2-gate Zealot before there's anything else out on the map, or maybe defending your ranged units early on, keeping the enemy units at bay. That kind of stuff is pretty good. Now here, since I felt like my opponent was macroing, I decided to go for it. A 102 supply Cyclone SCV pool. This is 8 minute 30 in the game, which is very late for this, by the way. Now, we're going to catch an Archon. He did indeed have charge, which is pretty scary for me. But the Raven auto turrets managed to tank a lot for me. Those Stalkers are in the background. He blinks in the middle of a sea of SCVs and Cyclones, which is not a good idea. And that is going to be game number 2 going into our pocket. Game number 3 of the loser bracket is going to be against Airhawk Fire. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little nervous for this match. And the reason why I was nervous is because Airhawk Fire in the past has had a knack of absolutely ruining me when doing challenges. And it's because he likes to do my most hated build, which is the 4-gate blink build. You guys might have heard me complain about that before. It's basically just a semi-blink all-in, which is both safe and kills you if you're too greedy. So you just have to imagine me sitting there, you know, going for mass ravens or something ridiculous, and then I just get blink all in, then I die. I think it happened like 2 or 3 times in these ESL cups. So I was really trying to figure out a way to, you know, get him before that or despite that. Now, he's also the highest MMR player we have played against so far, including in the winners bracket. I think he's about 6.3 to 6.4k MMR. That's definitely a pretty devastating opponent. But this is where the fun begins, because in this game, I'm going to bring back one of my most legendary builds ever. If you guys were around when I was still doing Terran School, when I was mostly an educational channel before I started, you know, going off the rails completely pretty much, you might remember the Bulldozer. The Bulldozer is a build that I really like to do to just kill Protoss players fast back in the day. And I mean, it's kind of hard to explain exactly what it is. You're going to have to see it, right? But anyway, we're going to open with a gas first. And we're going to throw him off instantly. Because this is not just a regular gas first. Even if I just have 1 gas, you might think you're going to Reaper expand. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to build a factory before expanding despite just being on 1 gas. Now, this build might be my most well-calculated build ever. As you guys know, most of my builders and strategies are more experience-based or just, intuition-based or just completely YOLO, right? I don't usually have these very well-calculated out builds. But this build is actually very well-calculated with the resource. So what we're going to do is I'm going to expand after a factory. I'm going to expand on the high ground because right now he is completely faked out. He didn't see either the factory. All he knows is that I quote-unquote fake my expansion. He saw me pretend to take an expansion on a low ground and then never build it. So for all he knows, I'm currently chilling on one base and that's it. I might have a proxy barracks or two. He has no idea, right? But in reality, we're just going for a slightly delayed expansion with extra tech. Now, if you really want to do this build properly, you're going to have to micromanage your gas pretty hard. Like, notice how I was mining full on gas with 3 workers earlier. Then I pulled out of gas and I'm slowly rallying back in. It's a pretty tough build to macro manage. I guess the easiest way to explain it is that after you get 150 gas mined for 1 factory plus 1 reactor, you then make sure you always have 16 on minerals and you just rally in gas from that point on. And then the build is going to work out perfectly. Now here the adept actually got 2 shots on my Hellion, which is quite annoying already. And then another adept showed up from downtown, which I'm really not happy with. Like, getting damage on your Hellions is quite annoying because you can repair it, but it kind of just takes all of the momentum and initiative out. Now, this could be a nice moment. It looks like he is going to shade forward, and I have 4 Hellions already, which means I'm now going to kill 2 Adepts. And I'm not quite sure if he saw the command center there. It's actually kind of hard to tell whether he saw it or not. Now, one thing that was, or the thing that did the most damage to me right there was that he took my attention. I always talk about attention as a resource, right? Annoying your opponent, distracting your opponent is a very valuable resource. And there, I didn't saturate my second gas in time, so my medevac was slightly delayed. It really is nothing too bad, but it was slightly delayed, so that's a little bit of damage done. And now the bulldozer setup is slowly coming online. So the reason why this is called the bulldozer, I guess I can start explaining it now because it's already in motion, is you have 4 Hellions on the map. Usually, when you make 4 Hellions, it means you are going to go for a Hellion drop. Because it's pretty easy to wall off the front. As you can tell, the front of his base is walled off. I can't just run it with my Hellions like that. So I need a medevac. So your opponent, first of all, splits units between their bases typically, right? Here, I'm trying to bait him to the spot where a medevac would be, and he's chasing me with just 1 stalker. But this is where the bulldozer comes into play. After the 4 Hellions, I made 4 Widow Mines, and now I can drop the Widow Mines around the entrance, so the units inside the wall are either going to have to run away or get blown up. In this case, all of the above. So I think all those stalkers died besides maybe 1, and now my Hellions are in the main base as well, and I'm very excited to see that there was no battery here, because that means that even if I go down to 2 Hellions, I can still kill the probes. Now, I unbird my Widow Mines. Normally, Widow Mines die after they shoot. That's usually what happens. But in this case, they actually stayed alive, so I can move them around a little bit. And now the next part, I mean, he's doing exactly what I said he would be doing. He is going to go for that 4-gate blink semi-all-in. So I need to make sure to defend against that. That's one thing about the bulldozer that's very hard to do, is the transition behind it. This game, it was actually pretty good, not gonna lie. I've definitely done worse transitions than this, but now I'm gonna go for a marine tank follow-up. And that was always the second part of the bulldozer. First, you have the bulldozer attack, and then you have a really hard-hitting follow-up. Now here I'm gonna go for a double engineering bay. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't even remember that I already built the other engineering bay. I just wanted it to have there for the wall. But then I actually started kind of liking it, because you can go for a 1 wall in instead of just +1, which is actually pretty nice. Now I have 2 bunkers at the front, 1 in the main. It might seem a bit excessive, but the truth is I did make 9 units, right? 4 Hellions, 4 Widow Mines, and a medevac that I traded for mostly workers. Now in this case I actually killed some stalkers too, which is absolutely fantastic. But they were mostly workers, so I need to be careful to not get overwhelmed. But this build, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys watching, a lot of you are going to love this build just because it looks awesome. You guys can understand why it's called the bulldozer. You just go straight to the front and you bring the pain. Now, this was a very good defense against the blink stalkers, by the way. Might not seem that efficient to stim without having medevacs, but it's just, I mean, I killed a lot of units over there. Keep in mind, I killed a lot of probes too. I might have not killed as many probes as you guys would think. Like, in the end, how many probes did I really kill? It's probably not like 15. It's probably less than 15, right? 15 would be absolutely fantastic. It's probably less than that. Now here I try to stim to get on top of the prism. It actually does work out, but my Marines are so low HP that we're not really winning against the Stalkers. I do get 2 of the Stalkers in the end, so that is quite nice. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up the most classic uThermal attack in the last years of my pro career. I always had one move, and for some reason it was so predictable, but it always worked out. Where I guess the best way to explain this is the way Protoss counters Terran attacks the easiest is to just put your Stalkers in front of their base and just kite the units when they move out. That way you will shave off unit after unit. If they stim, they're going to do 10 damage to all of their Marines. Now here, that was actually a bit annoying. For some reason, I was really convinced that that observer was in Marine range. I was like, I have enough Marines here, I can just scan. If he's not paying attention, we'll kill it instantly, which is going to be very nice. Now here, the reason why he brought it back is because he wants to see if I'm loading up in a drop or not. And this is the move that I was talking about. I would always send 2 medevacs all the way around the map and then move out to the front at the same time. If your opponent follows the medevacs with the Stalkers, then you can push across the map freely. If they don't follow them with the Stalkers, then you can drop in the main freely, and that's going to be a very annoying multi-prong for them. Now, that was a really bad mistake. I cannot overstate that. The reason why is that I clicked too many Marines on the medevac. It was 1 Marine and 1 Marauder, actually. So if he was paying attention, he would already know that I'm dropping, because those units were clearly following the medevac, right? Now, his Stalkers are still here, which makes it seem like he didn't actually realize that. I don't know if he wasn't looking at all, or if, I don't know, he just thought it was nothing and it was just a random misclick. I'm not gonna lie, he really should have known that there was a drop going on there. And now this is the exact situation you want to be in. Stalkers are at the front, which means that this drop is just going to go absolutely ham. If there are no Stalkers here, and it's just Zealots, you can just stay in between the mineral lines, and it's not going to do that much damage. Now, here he's either... Okay, he recalled a couple Stalkers. Those are really not going to do that much. Keep in mind, I went for the double engineering base, so my Marines actually have 1-1, which makes them way stronger than they usually would be. Now, he's going to try to take an early fight here. This fight was actually quite good by him, but once again, these are 1-1 Marines, and I have depowered all of his gateways so far. There's 1 more pylon that I'm killing, and now I think literally every building in the main base is unpowered. He's not going to be able to warp in anything at all. Doesn't matter if he has 1,000 minerals or not. And just like that, we have beaten one of our biggest rivals in these tournament challenges. Round number 5 of the loser bracket is going to be against Art. Now, I know we've only won 3 games in the loser bracket so far, but we also won 1 in the winners bracket, meaning this is now round 5. And round 5 actually sounds pretty advanced already. I'm not quite sure how many more games you actually have to win to get to the prize buddy. I think top 4 gets paid or so. And I guess it's just a pretty big tournament overall. And as you can see, my SUV is out on a mission, which means that I'm going to do something a little extra cheesy this game. Now, Art is about a 6,000 MMR Protoss. I actually couldn't find his profile on SE2 Pulse, so I'm not quite sure what his MMR really is. Now, I'm going to proxy this barracks a little further away. A lot of times when you do like a proxy Reaper in particular, or pretty much any proxy, it's always better if you proxy it closer. But I always think it's kind of a lame way to lose when you get your proxy scouted really early. It's not very common at all, but some people like scouting around on their base instead of your base. And then they kill your SUV and you're pretty much screwed. That's kind of a lame way to go out, especially in this best of 1 loser bracket. So I'm going to proxy it a little further away. And keep in mind, these are supposed to be sophisticated cheeses anyway, so it's not like I necessarily have to, win with the first Reaper or anything like that. I'm gonna have different stuff coming behind it. Now, I have to admit, I didn't notice at the time of playing this build, but I realized it somewhere in the middle, so I guess I might as well discuss it already, is that Proxy Reaper was actually pretty heavily nerfed in a way. And if I ask that, I bet none of you know what I'm talking about right away. If you guys, know what I'm talking about, I'd be very surprised. Now, why it's nerfed is because usually the way you do Proxy Reaper is you build your bunker like that. You build it in the middle of the mineral line. This way your SUV has a lot of potential outs. But at some point, they increased the range of the probe attacking. And even there, when I thought it was completely safe, it could get attacked. So there's basically no chance anymore that you can actually get your bunker up. Before, that SCV would have been safe, and then you know, it's going to be like 25 health or whatever it was before it was getting attacked, and then you can micro it around, the Reaper arrives, blah, blah, blah. But now with that change, I think you might actually not be able to do the bunker part anymore. You can still do it without bunker, you can fake the bunker as well, but you cannot really do the bunker in a mineral line anymore, so that is a little bit painful. I'm going to go for 2 Reapers over here because I want to kill a lot of probes, and I'm also going to make a starport on 1 base. The starport on 1 base is not very common, actually. This is just, you know, me trying to create chaos in the weird stuff on 1 base. Normally, I think ideally you expand after the factory. Well, that is not in the cards today. There's another thing, by the way, about this build that was actually nerfed. So I was planning on doing a 2 Cyclone drop, which is the way you were following up Proxy Reaper most recently. But now the Cyclone got reverted to the part where you need a tech lab again. So I don't, or was it a tech lab or was it just a build time? My brain is a bit confused on that right now. I feel like you needed a tech lab before too. Or maybe just like the build time that they increased or whatever. I just know that it's harder to get 2 Cyclones out now. That's basically the point of it. It doesn't really matter what the exact change was, but there were 2 nerfs that had nothing to do with my build that have sadly nerfed my build. And I really found it out in the middle of trying to play this game. So I decided to go for a bit of a different follow-up. It's not really going to bother me that much. It sucked that the bunker at the start was denied so easily. But in the end, I decided to just go for a 3 Hellion drop, which actually is a build that I do like. It's a bit underrated. It's kind of... I think it's a bit better of a build if you do it in a prepared format. So let's say you're... I have no idea how my Reaper was attacking my own Reaper there, by the way. I almost freaking killed it. It's more of a prepared format where you know someone responds to a Proxy Reaper in that way, so you follow it up with 3 Hellions. If, for example, you play against someone that likes to make blind batteries or play Stargate, for example, those are going to be really good against 3 Hellion drop, and you might not want to do it already. Now here he finds my medevac. I don't think he's going to be able to kill that. It does survive with about 30 HP left, and we're going to be able to get in here. Now he did make a battery, sadly, which is going to make this already a lot less effective. I think I've explained the mechanic before, but I can explain it again. Under a battery, if your shots are perfectly lined up, exactly, there you can see it. If they're perfectly lined up, you will kill the probes. If 1 Hellion is slightly out of range and attack like half a second later, none of the probes die instantly. Which basically means that you're still going to kill a lot of probes, but you're probably going to miss a couple extra kills because of that battery, which is annoying. Now my follow-up is going to be similar to the last game. Or was it the last game? Yeah, I guess it was the last game. But instead I'm going to go for 2 tech labs, which means I'm going to play a little bit more Marauder heavy, because I need to get both stim and combat shield still, instead of getting them earlier, like in the last game with that marine tank push. So my follow-up is not going to be as brutal, but all in all, I think it looks okay. I would say that we definitely did not do enough damage. We killed 2 probes with the initial Proxy Reaper. He lost a little bit of mining time, and I think with those Hellions, I want to say that we... I don't know, killed 7 probes or something like that. Definitely don't think it's enough. I mean, keep in mind, I went for a Proxy Reaper followed by a 1-1-1 on 1 base. Similar to the winner bracket game that we lost against Psionic, if you guys remember that one from the last video. So definitely not super excited yet, but all in all, my situation is decent. I feel pretty safe against Blinkstalkers, and I think this is going to be alright from here on out. Engineering bay in the wall. I really like making... I'm not sure if you guys have noticed and have wondered about it. I really like making a wall at the front with my engineering base and supply depots and stuff, just because it's harder to blink on top of the tank. I feel like it's just really nice to play around with SimCity. In fact, I pretty much invented walling the natural against Protoss, which was never a thing, and I wonder if you guys are going to remember why. I explained this in a Terran School episode a very long time ago. And it's that if you wall off the natural, you pretty much have like double the chances of winning against DTs. Because usually what happens if they go for DTs and you know, it doesn't even matter if you have detection or not really. 1 DT in the main, 1 in the natural, you're very unlikely to have 2 scans, you're gonna suffer, right? But if you have the wall off, DTs are already not really gonna be able to hit the natural. Like you just repair the depot that's being sliced on and that's it, you know? So walling off the natural is actually very comfortable. These days, I don't really see a whole lot of Dark Templar drop. What I see way more often is just this, you know, blink aggression, whether it's 3-gate or 4-gate. 2-gate blink actually falling out of fashion a little bit. It's more 3 and 4-gate these days. But then if you have a tank, you can still get the wall of up in time. Just a tip before you guys actually try that, you do need to play with tanks, because otherwise Stalkers are just going to kill your depots for free, and then you're sad, because you're supply blocked and broke, and I mean... obviously doesn't really sound like a fantastic situation. Now, scanning my opponent's base here did not necessarily make me happy, because I saw that he was chrono boosting Immortals, and he was also making Zealots already. And I think what I picked up from this is that I was, yeah, definitely slightly behind this game. Normally the Terran pushes, the way they work is the opponent doesn't really have Zealots yet, and they kind of start warping them in around the time you move out. So they warp in like 8 Zealots first or so. Oh, this is going to be really cool, by the way. I remember this one. Look at that Reaper Grenade. The 745 useful Reaper Grenade. How often do you get to see that, guys? You just have to... You have to admire it when you see it. That's absolutely beautiful. It's so beautiful, I even forgot what I was talking... Oh, yeah, no, I remember what I was talking about. So usually they warp in 8 Zealots with their 8 gateways, and then, you know, they try to buy a little time with Stalkers. They warp another round of Zealots, and then you fight. But here he was already making Zealots a while before I moved out. So that was definitely not pleasant to see. Now, he was attacking me over here, and first I was like, what on earth are you doing? And then I saw that he actually had so many Zealots, and they all came from the flank, and this was a really well executed fight by him. Now, you can see that we're still trading pretty decently here. We cleaned up all the Immortals besides one. We killed pretty much all the Zealots besides the reinforcing ones. But this was, all in all, a pretty terrible fight. This was pretty much an all-in push by me. I didn't pull the SCVs, because pulling SCVs when there's already that many Zealots out on the field is not usually that good of an idea. Actually, pretty cute move here to save the Raven, by the way, putting it on that high ground over there. I don't think I've ever saved a Raven like that before. Shows you that even this late into StarCraft, after playing so many games, you can still get crazy situations. Well, now, I mean, the situation is pretty clear. We're kind of cooked here. We're in a lot of trouble. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adapt a playstyle that I used in my pro career a lot. That is basically just a super weird, cheesy way of playing normal PvP. And what that is, I guess the way you can see it is if you don't like playing against Protoss splash damage of any kind, which, you know, most people don't like, but especially not me. Colossus, Disruptors, Storm, doesn't matter. The easiest way to play against it is just to make a lot of tanks. Because tanks are always going to be good against the robo-based splash damage. Not necessarily against... Excuse me. Not necessarily against Archon Zealot, for example. But against the robo-based splash damage units, it's going to be pretty good. And tanks are also a way to kind of steal a victory. Like, with tanks, you can kind of win by accident sometimes. And that's what I'm definitely trying to do here. So at this point, I have to imagine we're probably down by about 30 supply or so. It's not going to be too crazy, you know, he's not going to be at 160, but I would say he's definitely at 140 supply right now. And the only way I can survive is just by spamming static defenses and tanks. And then this kind of play has no follow-up into a real macro game whatsoever. And this is once again just a complete fake macro game, right? I'm going to be on 3 bases. I'm going to stop getting upgrades. I'm going to spam tanks. And then I'm going to go for pretty much a very elaborate version of the uThermal move that I explained with the drops earlier, where I sent 2 drops around the base. I'm going to try to make, I mean, as many tanks as I can. Doesn't matter if it's 10 or 15, just a lot. Then instead of a 2 medevac drop around the map, I'm going to send like 4. And then while he's distracted, I'll get a really good position with the tanks. That's how I want to play it. And I also think that that's going to be the only way for me to win this game. I explained before that if you're playing against the Protoss and you're just defending and, you know, you're just going into the late game, the game is very easy to play for them. Like, realistically, at a somewhat even skill level, you're just not really going to be able to win those games, right? Especially being behind. So if I would go into a very standard 4th command center, double upgrades, Ghost Viking game here, I'm sure I would lose. Even if I would consider myself to be a little bit better than my opponent here, I'm sure I would lose that kind of game because it's just not going to be that hard for him to play. So I really think that even though I am being a little bit of a cheesy weirdo with this build, it actually makes a lot of sense to do. So there you can see my second factory is already finishing. Oh, by the way, guys, a little bit of a tip. When you're trying to defend against Colossus, it's pretty funny, you might not have thought of it, but making missile turrets in your base is actually very good. Because Colossus don't always kill the turrets, like their units tend to go for your units instead, right? And then turrets actually shoot at Colossus because they're tall enough. I saw a game once where 1 missile turret killed 3 Colossus in the middle of a fight. So just me making turrets here, what that's gonna do is just make it harder for him to aim with me, basically. Because at this point, I can guarantee you guys that he's maxed out. He's at 200 supply, probably has better upgrades than me, at least by 1, maybe 2. I'm gonna be on 1-1 for the rest of this game. He is probably on 2-1 or 2-2, I'm not quite sure. That is really funny. He sent in DTs, but you know, I just built a lot of anti-Colossus missile turrets, which sounds really dumb. But yeah, I mean, it did help. Now, I think we killed an observer earlier, and we killed a Dark Shrine as well. Also, me sending harassment all the time like this is just another way to keep him distracted for my end plan. Now, his entire army is back at home, and that's gonna give me a little bit of an opportunity here. As you guys could see, I was already sending out those medevacs on the left side. He saw it with a Zealot right there, I just noticed on the minimap. But I really doubt there's a chance he actually saw that, you know, based on how much harassment has been going on in his bases. But now the drop is approaching the corner of the map, and it's going to be time for me to do the exact move that I was talking about. I do like the idea that I'm even upgrading weapons for the mech units, by the way. Like, normally you would obviously go for 2-2 for the bio, and you wouldn't really upgrade these tanks at all in PvP. But in this case, I mean, the tanks are going to be the one doing all the heavy lifting. Now, there I actually sent a medevac on accident, which does annoy me a little bit. I guess I didn't hotkey it properly. Now, you're going to have to keep scanning forward when you play like this, because if you ever get attacked when you're unsieged, you're just dead. Like, very simply put, if you ever get attacked when you're unsieged, you're absolutely dead. There's going to be harassment in my base. This was to be expected. Now, I do have the missile turrets ready, so that's going to be quite nice. Looked for a second like he was about to go in there, and here comes the big drop in the main base. 40 supply in the main base, the rest of my army at the front. I'm not quite sure if he was going for a recall there. It kind of looked like it, but I couldn't quite see it. Now his army is gone, so it probably is recalling. But the recall was not executed that well, so he's going to lose. I think he actually lost 3 Colossus there, I believe. He's going to lose that one. He loses 3 Colossus and the Disruptor, which is an absolutely mega moment. Now, the biggest problem here is actually Zealots and Archons, because I have a lot of tanks. Tanks are not really that good against Zealots and Archons. Like, it's going to be quite painful. And I tried to get in there with the Disruptors, but the tanks absolutely annihilate those. And after killing all those units for, well, essentially free, you have to imagine that we did get our supply lead back. I wouldn't say that we're winning this game now, because my opponent has a fully fledged 3-base economy. And, well, I mean, maybe it's 2 bases if you keep in mind the damage they did in the main base. But my 3rd CC economy took a lot of damage, and my eco is not that great right now myself. Now, what I'm doing here is an advanced move. That sounds very simple, but it's a mistake that pretty much everyone I watch play this game makes, is that you would keep going with this army. Terran armies usually don't work that well unless it's all together. Like, you want to make sure that you have your tanks and your ghosts and your Vikings, etc. together. You don't really want to move out with just like 15 bio units and 10 tanks. Sounds very strong. In reality, it dies to 20 Zealots that he could warp in with 2 warp-ins. If I get 20 Marines with that, all of a sudden he's going to need like double the army size, which is going to make that way more annoying for him. Extend the F2 to my Raven over there. So now my army supply is 180. My opponent seemed to have a decent army supply, but it was also not that crazy. There's a lot of Immortals here. This does not look like a good fight for him, and indeed, he's going to lose a couple of Immortals there on the backhand, which is absolutely awesome. Immortals, at this point in the game, not going to be that strong anymore. I think they're mostly the strongest when the armies are small, or at least when you have a lot of splash damage, but we killed all of his splash. Keep in mind, guys, 3 Colossus, which would have been the absolute MVPs in this fight, he lost them all while recalling them against a drop. So that drop not just only distracted him, allowed me to kill his most important base, he also lost 3 Colossus there, which is insane. Now, I decided to stim on that Disruptor. That is a move that you should really, you know, only try at your own risk. It's not a very safe move at all, you could say. I'm just trying to catch a couple units over here, and now it looks like he's going in. My tanks are going to have an absolute field day with those Stalkers. I have 2 more tanks up there on the high ground as well, and we do manage to clutch the game with my OG mass tank style in a game that looked very, very rough. Game 5 is going to be against none other than Liquid Mana. About 6,500 MMR on the EU server. Definitely the strongest opponent so far. And we also got a little bit unlucky here. All the maps in the loser bracket were predetermined, and I think this one was one of the hardest ones to cheese on. I was kind of hoping to avoid this one. In fact, in the first series I played in a loser bracket, I tried to veto this because I didn't know that it was all predetermined. And they were like, no, 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 no. And now, unfortunately, we have run into El Dorado in the end. This is a map I would enjoy for some of my weird macro styles, but sadly that is not what we're doing in this video. Now, I did have a pretty cool idea. I wanted to kind of mix my most brutal and my most sophisticated cheeses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a fake proxy. You guys have seen this before, of course. This is nothing crazy. But then instead of going for a more typical 1-1-1 follow-up, I'm going to straight up do a 1-base solid. And that is a build that I did enjoy doing a couple times in my pro career. It's actually pretty decent, mostly for the fact that I know it sounds dumb, But let's say you're playing normal, right? You go for a Reaper expand. Then if you have no command center, your opponents are going to be suspicious. If you go for a fake proxy, the standard follow-up is to go for a factory and then expand later. So when you do that, they're not going to be suspicious of the fact that there's no command center. And then you can one base all in without them actually seeing it coming, which is a pretty funny way because you wouldn't really think it would work that way, but it actually does. Now, at this point, I'm already slightly worried. And the reason why I'm slightly worried is because there has not been a probe scout. This also happened to me against Ateshi in round number 2, or round number 3, match number 2 of this video, where I went for a fake proxy and they didn't scout. So my fake proxy timing is definitely a little off the mark today. Or maybe just in general, maybe Protoss players don't scout anymore, who knows. But that's going to make this a little painful, because a big part of this is what I just explained, right? You fake them out, you go for the fake proxy, they quote-unquote know you're going to go for the factory command center follow-up, and that's where you can get mind game then. But now, he might go for like a later scout with an adept or something like that, and that's going to be a little painful. So here are the 2 extra barracks. Now, I haven't seen an adept show up yet, which is also a little bit suspicious. Then my own plan for my follow-up is going to be, I make tanks, I make double tech labs on the barracks, and then we go for stim combat shield and try to win with 1 SCV pool. Now, not to be overly dramatic here, but based on what I've seen so far, this is looking very, very rough. And the reason why it's looking rough is because my opponent has also not scouted with an adept, which means he's most likely to scout with either a Stargate unit or an hallucinated Phoenix. There it is. And if he doesn't make any crucial mistakes, this game should be his. Now, I have to admit, Mana himself has died to a lot of these stupid builds by me in the past. So, you know, not to shit hawk him, but I definitely thought there was still a possibility that we would win. You know, it really once again depends on his mistakes, but it is what it is. Now, based on his base, I haven't seen anything crazy in particular. One thing that is kind of nice, I mean, it's a very small thing going my way, but it's the fact that he did open with a sentry, meaning that his tech would be slightly delayed. So let's say his choice to hold would be to go for Colossus, whatever, right? Then his Colossus would be slightly delayed, which would help me out here. So that's, even though the sentry it was good for him, that is one thing that might have caused a downside in his build. Now we're going to be able to get into his base. We see an early battery there, which means he was preparing for an attack right away. And I think with this Reaper, we should be able to scout everything. There's another gateway going down over there. A little bit of a juke there with my Reaper. That's always nice. And he is going up to 3 gateways already, and he has a Stargate. And I believe I saw that Stargate was making an Oracle, actually, which is quite strange. There's another Oracle on my main base right now. And really, guys, I have to admit, I am not a huge fan of how he's dealing with this, because my setup is already well on the way. And now he's making Oracles, which are quite expensive units, just to trade them for a couple SCVs, even though I don't really need those resources anymore. If you look at my resources now, especially my gas count, you'll see that I already have enough gas to start another tank, and I have already started stim and combat shields. So even though he killed a couple workers and I already don't have that many, I'm not really the biggest fan of his approach here. Now, if he was me, what he would have done is add a second Stargate, then he's going to have 5 Oracles, and then he would probably still crush me. But something tells me he's not going to be that crazy. I think he's just going to play this relatively static from here on out. But he still needs a solution for my big attack. I mean, realistically, he did have a lot of gateways, right? He could have gone for a Twilight Council to make, let's say, either Blink or Charge at this point, maybe even Adept Glaives. Now, that was actually pretty funny. I'm not quite sure if you guys noticed, but the indicator on that Cyclone range was so far off, it looked like I shot that Phoenix like 5 range out of the way of that indicator. Now here we have to do one thing that's important. Since he's not going to make Stalkers, we can pretty much freely go across the map. This is one thing you have to pay attention to. Very crucial tip for anyone learning Protoss players. You have to send 1 Marine first, because there could be a stasis ward. If you get caught in a big stasis ward, you're in trouble. There I could see the shimmer. And now we have a pretty good attack over here. Only 5 Marines in total, I believe, caught by stasis wards. It kind of seems like he actually wanted to go for it. Now this was really good for me, because he went for it, and he didn't realize the SCVs were there. So this was a really big mistake there. He's going to lose a lot of units already, and this looks like we might have a chance. I do not have any economy whatsoever. My opponent has 40 probes, probably about 5 gateways. And he had the opportunity to warp in a sentry there, meaning we probably cannot get into the main base anymore. There we go. We forced a force field. Now we have to make one important move. That's to siege our tanks closely there. Then we have to scan immediately because we need to try and target down that sentry. If we can't target it down, then he's going to be able to force field us forever. He's trying to shade his adepts over there. It's actually a good move to finish that adept, by the way, because my tanks would have absolutely obliterated my units. Now I already see a shimmer on the right side that if he is warping in, I will not have a scan, and the Dark Templar is going to be the end of our run. That was his choice to hold the attack, and he barely got it out in time. Almost messed it up by attacking a little bit early with the Zealots, but that's going to be it. We finished in round 6 of the loser bracket. It was a pretty good run overall with the cheeses, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and that's going to be it for today. If you did enjoy it, give a video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all for the next video. Adios.